I'll never forget the Christmas when I found out Santa wasn't real. It wasn't because my parents sat me down and told me. It wasn't because some kid at school ruined it. No, it was because of a box in the garage. It was Christmas Eve. I was 8, and I'd been so excited all day, barely able to sit still. My parents had sent me to bed early, saying Santa wouldn't come if I was awake, but I couldn't sleep. Every little creak or rustle in the house made me think it was him, Santa, sneaking around, leaving presents under the tree. After tossing and turning for what felt like hours, I decided to get up. I thought maybe I'd catch a glimpse of him, or at least see the presents. I crept down the hallway, careful not to make a sound. But when I got to the living room, it was empty. No Santa, no presents. Just the dark glow of the Christmas lights on the tree. That's when I remembered the garage. Don't ask me why I thought to look there. Maybe I figured that's where Santa was hiding everything before setting it up. Or maybe I just wanted to snoop. Either way, I tiptoed over to the garage door, opened it as quietly as I could, and stepped inside. The air was freezing. The floor was cold against my bare feet, and the only light came from the dim bulb hanging overhead. I shivered, hugging my arms to my chest and looked around. That's when I saw it, the box. It was shoved into the corner, a big cardboard box that didn't look like it belonged there. It was old and battered, with torn edges and dark stains on the sides. At first, I thought it might have been a box my dad had forgotten to throw out. But then I noticed the writing. On the front of the box, in big, messy black letters, were the words, "Don't open me." I froze. My heart thumped in my chest. My dad's handwriting wasn't like that. His was neat and careful. This writing was different, rushed, like someone had scrawled it in a hurry. I told myself it was probably just a joke. Maybe it was for storage or something Dad had picked up at work. But it didn't make sense. The box was too beat up, like it had been left outside for a long time. And why would anyone write that on a box? That's when I heard it. A scratch. It was faint, but clear enough to make me jump. A soft scraping noise coming from inside the box, like claws on cardboard. I took a step back. My first thought was maybe it was a rat, or some other animal that had somehow gotten stuck in there. I should have turned around and gone back to bed. I should have run to my parents, but I didn't. Instead, I stepped closer. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might wake the whole house. The box sat there, still and silent again, like it was waiting for me. I swallowed hard and leaned in, trying to hear if the scratching would come back. It didn't. But the box moved. It was just a small jerk forward, scraping against the concrete floor, but it was enough to make me stumble backward. "Dad?" I whispered, hoping he might pop out from somewhere, laughing at a prank. But the garage was empty. It was just me and the box. That's when the voice came, soft and raspy, like someone whispering from far away. "I'm not supposed to be here," it said. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. I looked around wildly, but there was no one there. The voice had come from the box. "Who's in there?" I asked, my voice shaking. No answer. I didn't want to get closer, but I couldn't stop myself. It was like my feet had a mind of their own. Slowly, I reached out and touched the box. The cardboard felt damp and cold under my fingers. I pulled open the top flap. Inside, there was nothing. No rat, no presents, no anything, just blackness. So deep it felt like it was swallowing the dim light from the garage. And then, in the middle of the darkness, 2 glowing yellow eyes opened. I screamed and stumbled back, nearly tripping over my own feet. The eyes stayed where they were, staring at me, unblinking. The voice came again, louder this time. "You shouldn't have opened it." The box tipped over on its own, hitting the ground with a loud thud. The darkness inside spilled out, spreading across the floor like smoke. It moved slowly, creeping toward me, and I could feel the cold coming off of it, seeping into my skin. I turned to run, but my legs felt like jelly. Before I could move, something started rising out of the darkness. It was tall, with long, thin limbs and skin that looked wet and slimy, like something that had been pulled from a swamp. Its face was worse. Its mouth stretched into a grin too wide, full of sharp teeth that glinted in the faint light. It stepped toward me, its movements slow and jerky, like it wasn't used to walking. I finally found my voice and screamed, loud and desperate. The next thing I remember, I was in my bed. It was morning. Sunlight was streaming through the window, and I could hear my parents laughing in the kitchen. For a moment, I thought maybe it had all been a bad dream. But when I went to the living room, the bike I'd wanted was sitting under the tree, and the garage door was open. I crept outside, my heart pounding. The box was gone, but in the driveway, scratched deep into the frost-covered concrete, was one word: thanks. I never told anyone about what happened. I never rode that bike either. And from that day on, I promised myself one thing: I'd never open a box I didn't recognize again. Last year, on Boxing Day, I found a really cool ornament in a clearance box. It had a built-in camera to record a unique perspective on your holiday celebrations. I grabbed the last one from the store's dusty shelf and brought it home for less than $10. I forgot about it until my wife, my 2 daughters, and I decorated the house earlier this month. I told my daughters about the camera and said we'd secretly catch Santa in the act. I had an old costume in the attic and intended to deliver some gifts in full view of the camera on Christmas night. My girls were overjoyed and went back and forth trying to find the best place to put the ornament on the tree. They had no idea Daddy repositioned it later so it could actually catch the living room and a good angle. In the nights leading up to Christmas, I turned the camera on to make sure everything was working properly. In the morning, I previewed the footage, just long enough to confirm the thing was working. Satisfied, I inserted the micro SD card back into the ornament and slipped in a new battery in anticipation for the big night. Daddy didn't want to disappoint his girls with a failed recording. We enjoyed Christmas Eve as a family, playing board games and eating way more junk food than there was room in our stomachs. Like we do every year, we let our daughters open one gift from Mommy and Daddy before going to bed. The girls, still riding their sugar high, could be heard giggling in their bedrooms from all the way up the stairs. From time to time, my wife and I could hear one of them shush the other, claiming she'd heard hoofs on the roof or bells jingling. Eventually, our kiddos dozed off. My wife kissed me on the cheek and headed to bed while I turned off all the lights. I retrieved the costume and tiptoed to the living room, getting ready for my big feature film debut. I did everything you would expect Santa to do. I ate most of the cookies, I drank the milk, I pet my large stomach and said my ho-ho-hos, and I dropped a few presents by the fireplace, all in full view of the camera. A pretty good acting job, if I do say so myself. On Christmas morning, the girls came running into our bedroom to wake us up. They excitedly insisted we watch the video before opening the presents. I transferred the footage to my laptop, forwarded to where Santa showed up, and pressed play. My girls squealed with delight and jumped in front of the screen, frantically waving at Santa while obscuring the video from my view. It brought me so much joy to see how happy the girls were. I was too lazy to stop the video, so it continued to play in the background while we unwrapped out gifts. I spotted a box I had not seen the night before. It was a small and wrapped in a blue foil paper I did not recognize. My name was on it, but my wife seemed as surprised as I was to see it there. Noticing my confusion, my youngest daughter spoke. "Daddy, that's gotta be from Mr. Elf," she said, her voice cheerful and bright. I was ready to dismiss her elf comment as just another weird thing kids say, but my wife wasn't so quick to ignore it. "Honey, what elf?" she asked. My daughter pointed to the laptop. By then, the video had ended, and all that was left on the screen was a preview of the first frame. "The one that came with Santa," she answered. Panic struck me like a bird in a jet propeller. I know my wife didn't dress up as an elf. I scanned the video, clicking forward and back until I saw what my daughter had seen. There was someone in the living room. He walked into the corner after I had turned the lights off. He stood there watching me parading around as Santa. The video went completely quiet after that. It was as though the camera failed to record a single sound. The strange, tall man in an elf costume stood perfectly still for over an hour, watching the camera from a distance. After a while, he walked over to the plate of cookies and bit the head off a gingerbread man. I glanced at the plate and saw his teeth mark on the decapitated cookie. The man then quietly approached the Christmas tree. I thought the audio wasn't working, but as he reached the tree, I began hearing his slow and steady breaths. He reached towards the ornament, and the video stopped. In a terrified frenzy, I grabbed the blue box he'd left behind. I ripped the bow off of it and tossed the frilly thing away. I frantically removed the wrapping paper, opened the box, and looked inside. There, on a bed of bubble wrap, was the battery I'd put in the camera the night before. My wife took the ornament and opened the back. The battery was missing. I don't know what scares me more, what the camera caught or what the elf might have done after he turned off the camera. I didn't believe in ghosts, never did. But that changed last Christmas. It was supposed to be a fun weekend with friends, but it turned into something I still can't explain. I don't even talk about it anymore, except now. I need to get this out, even if no one believes me. It started like any other Christmas party. Rachel, a friend from college, invited us to her family's old mansion in the mountains. She'd just inherited it from her grandfather, and she wanted us all to spend Christmas there. "It's huge," she said, "like something out of a movie, perfect for a snowy Christmas." There were 7 of us: Rachel, her boyfriend Matt, Nick, Emily, Claire, Liam, and me. We hadn't all been together in years, so I was excited. I didn't think twice about it. When we got there, the snow was already falling. The house was even bigger than Rachel had said. 3 stories, with long hallways and old wooden floors that creaked with every step. It was beautiful, but it felt cold. Not just because of the weather, though that didn't help. The first night was great. We drank, played music, and opened gifts. Rachel had the place decorated perfectly, with twinkling lights and candles everywhere. We laughed so much I didn't even notice how heavy the snow was getting outside. Around midnight, the storm got worse. The power flickered a few times before going out completely. Rachel said it happened all the time, and brought out some flashlights and candles. No one seemed too worried. We lit the fire, poured more drinks, and kept the party going. That's when we heard it. A loud thud came from upstairs. Everyone froze. "Probably just the wind," Rachel said, trying to brush it off. But it didn't sound like the wind. It sounded like something heavy falling. Matt and Nick went to check it out while the rest of us stayed in the living room. We waited, joking nervously, but when they came back, their faces were pale. "Emily's missing," Matt said. We spread out to look for her, calling her name. I was with Claire when we found her. She was lying in one of the upstairs bedrooms, flat on her back, eyes wide open. She wasn't breathing. Claire screamed, and I swear my blood turned to ice. There was no blood, no sign of injury, just Emily, dead. Everyone gathered in the room, panicking. "Maybe it was a heart attack," Liam said, but he didn't sound convinced. "Heart attack?" Nick snapped. "She was fine 2 minutes ago." Rachel tried to stay calm, but I could see the fear in her eyes. "We need to call for help," she said. Matt held up his phone. "There's no signal. The storm's knocked everything out." We carried Emily's body downstairs, not knowing what else to do. The room felt colder, and not just because of the storm. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us. We argued for hours about what to do. Nick wanted to try walking to the nearest town, but Rachel said it was too dangerous in the storm. "We'll freeze before we get halfway there," she said. Then Rachel said something that made the room go silent. "This house, it's got a history." "What kind of history?" Claire asked, her voice trembling. Rachel hesitated. "My grandfather used to say it was cursed. He said the house has a way of punishing people." "Punishing them for what?" Nick asked, rolling his eyes. "For their secrets," Rachel whispered. It sounded ridiculous, but after what happened to Emily, no one laughed. We stayed in the living room, huddled by the fire, trying to stay awake. Then Nick disappeared. One minute, he was sitting across from me, muttering about how stupid all of this was. The next, he was gone. We searched the house again, but this time, it felt different, darker. The whispers started then. At first, I thought it was my imagination, a faint murmur, just on the edge of hearing, but everyone else heard it too. It was coming from the walls, the floors, everywhere. We found Nick at the bottom of the grand staircase, his neck bent at an unnatural angle. Liam snapped. "It's one of us," he shouted. "Someone here is doing this." "That doesn't make sense," Rachel yelled back. "How could any of us?" "It's the house," Claire whispered. Her voice was so quiet I almost didn't hear her. "It knows about us." "What does that mean?" I asked. Claire didn't answer, but the look in her eyes scared me more than anything else. That's when the secrets started coming out. Liam was the first to crack. "Fine," he shouted. "Emily wasn't some innocent angel, okay? She blackmailed me for years. She knew things I couldn't let get out." Rachel's face went pale. "And Nick," she said quietly. "He wasn't just here to hang out. He was investigating my grandfather's death. He thought I had something to do with it." The air felt heavier with every confession, like the house was feeding on our guilt. I felt like I couldn't breathe. Matt disappeared next. 1 second he was there, pacing by the window, and the next he was gone. We heard his scream from the basement, but when we got there, all we found was his flashlight flickering on the cold, damp floor. It was just Rachel, Claire, and me now. The whispers had turned into full voices, mocking us, repeating things we'd said in the past, things we thought no one else knew. Rachel broke down, sobbing. "I shouldn't have brought you here," she said. I thought it was just stories. I didn't think it was real." "We need to leave," Claire said, shaking. "What about the storm?" I asked. "I don't care," Claire snapped. "I'd rather freeze out there than die in here." That's when we heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from the hallway. But no one else was left. The door creaked open and we saw it. A figure, tall and shadowy, with shifting faces, Emily, Nick, Matt, staring back at us. My chest tightened, and I felt a rush of memories I'd tried to bury. The lies, the betrayals, the things I'd done that I thought no one knew. The figure pointed at Rachel, and she screamed as it lunged at her. I don't know how I got out. 1 minute I was in that house, and the next I was stumbling through the snow, freezing and alone. When I turned back, the mansion was on fire, flames lighting up the stormy night. They said later it was an accident, a gas leak maybe, but I know better. The house wanted us gone, and it got what it wanted. I haven't seen Rachel or Claire since. Sometimes, late at night, I hear whispers, just faint enough that I can't quite make out the words. But I know it's the house. It remembers, and it knows what I did.